After I became a widow, I moved the savings into another account. My son still thinks he's in charge. Have you ever given so much of yourself that you forgot you existed? You cook their meals, fold their laundry, pick up their messes, and one day they call you too forgetful to handle your own life. I used to run this household. Every bill, every detail, every holiday. Now they hand me instructions like I'm a child. They say it's for my safety. But I wasn't unsafe. I was just unseen. Until the day I walked into the bank, alone. Until the day I stopped asking and started deciding. This is the story of how I took back the keys to my life. Not with a fight, but with something sharper, clarity. If you've ever felt invisible inside your own family, stay with me. You're not alone, and you're not done yet. My name is Eunice. I'm 73 years old, and I've lived in the same small town in northern Michigan since 1974. Most people around here know me from church or the farmer's market. Some just know me as Craig's mom. And for a long time, that was fine. But something happens when your world starts shrinking, when your decisions get double-checked, your money gets reviewed, and your name starts fading behind your son's email signature. This story isn't dramatic. No one screamed. No one slammed doors. But something did break. And I think it was the illusion that love and control are the same thing. So if you're someone who's ever sat quietly while someone else explained what's best for you, I invite you to listen. Not just to what happened, but to how I came back to myself. Subscribe if this speaks to you, because no one should grow old feeling erased. That morning, the silence in the kitchen was louder than ever. For the first time in 50 years, I brewed coffee for one. I didn't realize how mechanical marriage had made my mornings. I knew which burner to click first, how many scoops of coffee grounds he liked, which cupboard he always left cracked open because he insisted the hinges were off. Every little habit was still there, lingering in the house like the scent of wood polish and winter air. I moved through the routine slowly, careful not to bump the same corner he always did when coming in with the mail. The air outside was still, no birdsong, just that kind of cold that makes every sound feel muted. I sat at the kitchen table in my robe, hands wrapped around the chipped mug he gave me on our 25th anniversary. It had a cartoon dog on it. He thought it was hilarious. I hated it for about a week, then never drank from anything else again. I didn't cry that morning. The tears had come and gone in waves after the funeral. I think I've reached the stillness that comes after a long storm. Not peace, just quiet. Loretta knocked on the back door like she always did. 2 short taps, 1 long. She never used the front. Said it felt too formal, like she was visiting a stranger. I opened the door before she could finish the pattern. "Morning," she said, her breath visible in the cold. She held 2 paper cups from Edna's. "Got yours with just a splash of cream." I remembered. I nodded and stepped aside. Loretta had a way of entering quietly, like she was stepping into a memory instead of a house. We sat in silence for a bit, the kind of silence that doesn't demand anything. She set the cups on the table and folded her gloves into her coat pocket. "Do you sleep at all?" she asked eventually. "Enough," I lied. She didn't press. Just took a sip of coffee and stared out the window like she was expecting the snow to tell her something. "The place looks the same," she said. "You haven't moved anything." I didn't see the point. She glanced at the envelope of sympathy cards on the counter. "You gonna open those?" I shook my head. A long pause. "Not today," I added. She reached for her cup again, tapped the rim lightly. "Have you thought about the accounts yet? You know, now that it's just you?" I looked down at my coffee. The swirl of cream had settled into a pale cloud. I haven't touched any of that, I said, still in both our names. Loretta leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. Honey, I don't mean to sound harsh, but if you don't hold the keys, someone else will lock the door on you. That was Loretta's way. She never dressed her advice in soft fabric. She delivered it like a quilt with no batting, rough but warm. I don't know where to start, I admitted. I never handled the banking, never had to. You're not helpless, Eunice. You've just never been invited to the table. The house creaked as the heat kicked in. I hadn't realized how cold I was until that moment. Loretta finished her coffee and stood. Well, I'm headed to the market. I need eggs. Do you want anything? No, I'm good. Call me if you change your mind. About the eggs or the accounts. I walked her to the door, watched her steps fade into the white sidewalk, coat flapping gently in the wind. The moment she turned the corner, I closed the door and stood still in the foyer. Something inside me moved. Something I hadn't felt in years. Not anger, not grief, just a dull flicker of self. That evening, while washing the last dish from dinner, I remembered the bottom drawer of the file cabinet, the one with the rubber band around the handle. He'd always told me, "That's just the boring stuff. No need for you to mess with it." After I dried my hands, I walked into the spare room, knelt on the old carpet, and pulled open the drawer. It creaked like it hadn't been opened in a decade. Inside, old checkbooks, insurance policies, joint accounts, mortgage papers, folders labeled with dates and clipped receipts, every bit of our life together, alphabetized and forgotten. I sat on the floor for a long time, the cold seeping through my slippers. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Maybe proof that I hadn't imagined it all. The trust, the structure, the belief that someone else always knew best. I hadn't looked at those papers in years, but that night, I laid them all out on the table. I didn't know where to begin, so I started with the account statements. There were paper trails going back 25 years, each month carefully printed, each transaction noted. He always liked to keep things tidy. Not for me, not to share, just tidy for the sake of it. My name was there, printed right beside his, but I had no memory of ever signing those forms. I suppose I must have. At some point in our early days before Craig was even born, when we still believed life would be simple and predictable, he filled out the papers, told me where to sign, and I signed. Most of the balances hadn't changed in years. Money just sat there. No withdrawals, no transfers, just quiet accumulation, as if he'd prepared for something but never told me what. Retirement, emergencies, the unknown. Maybe he thought dying first was his last act of responsibility. There was something strangely comforting in those numbers, familiar, steady, but now they felt like secrets he never meant to keep. I stacked the papers by type, checking, savings, retirement, separate piles. I made a list in my notebook, the one I used for recipes and reminders. It felt strange writing Bank of Pine River next to grocery, whole milk, and Monday, trash bins out. But I needed to see it all in one place. Something real, something mine, even if it had been his first. Halfway through sorting, I found a folder I didn't recognize. Not one of his usual ones. It was labeled Eunice Trust. I sat up straighter. I opened it slowly. Inside was a document, a trust agreement. He'd set it up 5 years ago, quietly, privately. I flipped through the pages, feeling a pulse behind my ears. It named me as the beneficiary, of course, but it also named Craig as the successor trustee. I didn't know what that meant yet, but I had a feeling I wouldn't like it. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about control, about how much I had unknowingly surrendered over the years, about how easily someone I loved could assume I wouldn't or shouldn't be in charge of my own life. I closed the folder and rested my hand on it. I thought about Craig. Not cruel, not heartless, just certain. Certain that he was supposed to lead. Certain that I was meant to follow. That's what scared me more than anything. Not that he wanted to take over, but he thought it was already done. Later that night, I made myself a cup of tea and stood at the back window. The snow was falling again, soft and quiet, the kind that made the whole town hush. Craig had called the day before, left a voicemail. "Hey, Mom, I'll come by Sunday. We can go over everything. Bank stuff, house title, maybe talk about selling the side lot. It's probably too much for you now." He said it kindly, like he always did, like a son who thinks he's doing the right thing. I didn't call back. I remembered what Loretta had said. "You're not helpless. You've just never been invited to the table." And I realized she was right. I hadn't been invited. But maybe it was time I pulled up a chair anyway. That thought stuck with me as I cleared the table, stacked the documents, and placed the trust folder back into the drawer. This time on top, not hidden. I washed the mug with the cartoon dog, dried it carefully, and placed it back in the cabinet facing forward. I hadn't looked at those papers in years. But that night, I laid them all out on the table. I sat there a long time after the table was covered in paper. It was a strange thing, looking at the architecture of a life. Not the people, not the photographs, not the memories, but the infrastructure. The ledgers, the numbers, the notations written in margins, the little reminders he left himself. Transfer $200 for propane. Don't forget the December CD. He'd written in blue ink, always in all caps. I used to tease him for that. Said it looked like he was shouting at the bank. He'd grin and say, "Well, sometimes you have to." Now the handwriting felt like a fingerprint pressed into every sheet. It was oddly tender, strangely intimate. I traced one of the notes with my finger and wondered if he ever imagined I'd be reading them alone. The furnace kicked on again. That old rattle. The same one that drove him nuts every winter and he never got around to fixing. I thought of the hundreds of things like that. Tiny chores, unfinished, unnoticed, yet somehow holding up the rhythm of our days. I got up and turned on the radio. Static. Then the familiar voice of the late-night host from the AM station out of Allentown. He was talking about snowfall levels and how early the river was freezing this year. I let him talk, just for the comfort of another voice in the room. I wasn't ready for quiet again. There was still so much I didn't know. About accounts, about legal forms, about what any of it meant. But I didn't feel afraid, just unfinished. Like I'd walked into a room that had been locked for years, and now I was finally flicking on the lights. I folded the papers neatly, grouping them by type, then put them back in their folders. I wrote myself a short list. Learn what trustee means. Call Loretta. Refill coffee filters. I wasn't making a plan yet, but I was preparing to. That mattered. Craig brought his laptop over like it was a briefcase full of solutions. All I brought was banana bread. He called it a check-in visit, like I was a client and he was managing something official. Tina was with him, of course. She always came when he asked, but I never quite knew if she wanted to. Her coat was still buttoned when she sat down on the edge of the couch. I had set out plates and napkins, made coffee just the way they liked it. His black, hers with a teaspoon of sugar. The banana bread was a little overbaked on the edges, but it was still warm. I didn't offer advice or ask questions. I just placed the plate between them and said, "Still your favorite, right?" Craig didn't touch it. He had already opened his laptop before he'd even unzipped his coat. The screen cast a cold blue glow over the living room. The gas heater ticked behind us, trying its best to keep the cold out. So, he said, fingers tapping the trackpad. I put together a rough plan. Nothing complicated. Just some basics to get ahead of everything. His voice had that steady cadence people use in meetings when they think they're the smartest in the room. I nodded. Just once. I'd learned from years of church committees and bake sale planning that sometimes the best way to manage a conversation is to say as little as possible. He clicked through colorful pie charts and tables. This is what I project for the next 12 months. Fixed costs, property taxes, utilities. We're looking at a pretty consistent expense pattern. We are? I asked gently. Well, yeah, of course. I mean, you and I. It's your budget, but I figured I'd oversee it so you don't have to stress. He meant well, or at least, he thought he did. I could hear Loretta's voice in the back of my head. If you don't hold the keys, Craig went on, talking about consolidating the 2 checking accounts into one, said it would make it easier for us to track things. I wasn't sure when the shift happened, from me to us, but it was there, woven into his words, soft and assuming. Tina finally took a piece of banana bread, broke off a corner, and placed it back on her napkin. Her eyes stayed on the rug. She didn't say anything, didn't meet mine. That told me more than any word could have. Craig clicked again. I've also looked into transferring some of the savings into a low-risk investment, just something to keep it growing while it sits. Right now, inflation's basically eating it alive. That sounds efficient, I said, sipping my coffee. He looked pleased. Exactly. That's the point. We just need to simplify. I think I'll have you sign a few forms. Nothing urgent, but I can bring them next week. I smiled and reached for another slice of banana bread. You've really thought it through. He leaned back like a man who'd closed a deal. It's what Dad would have done. I nodded again, this time slower. After a few more clicks, he closed the laptop with a satisfied thump. That's all for now. I'll send you a summary by email. Oh, and I created a shared folder, so we can both track changes. Tina stood before he did. She brushed crumbs off her skirt, still not looking up. Thank you for the bread, she said quietly. I walked them to the door, hugged her a second longer than usual. She let me. Craig patted my shoulder like I was a pet, like I should be grateful. We're a good team, Ma. I didn't say anything. When the door shut behind them, I stood in the foyer holding the empty coffee cup. The heater kicked on again, and the house creaked. That old wood sound that always felt like home, and suddenly didn't. I washed the mugs and set them back in the cabinet. Everything went where it always had. The left side for coffee, the right side for tea. It's funny what habits stay even when the people don't. I stood at the kitchen sink a while longer than I needed to. The water had gone lukewarm, but I didn't mind. The weight of Craig's words lingered, not because they were cruel, but because they were so confidently delivered, like the way a man might speak to someone standing in a hole, offering a ladder he built without asking if she wanted to climb out in the first place. It wasn't new. Not really. That tone, that certainty, it had just never bothered me before. Maybe it was Loretta's voice in my head again. Maybe it was the drawer full of papers I had finally dared to touch. Or maybe it was the way Tina's eyes stayed fixed on the floor, as if she too recognized the pattern but didn't know how, or didn't dare, to break it. I dried my hands and walked back to the living room. The couch cushions still held their weight. His laptop had left a faint imprint on the coffee table, a smudge I wiped away without thinking. Then I sat down with my notebook. It was just a lined spiral, half full of recipes, birthdays I hadn't updated in years, and grocery lists I never remembered to bring. But that night, it became something else. I started writing. Not thoughts, not feelings, just facts. What I remembered. Which banks? what we used them for. The mortgage lender we'd used back in '89. The certificate of deposit he'd mentioned one winter when propane prices had gone up. The numbers were fuzzy, but the names weren't. I remembered them because I'd heard them in passing, sitting at the table while he did the taxes, or reading a notice he'd tossed in the recycling without opening. I flipped back a few pages and wrote, in capital letters, what I actually know. And then underneath, enough to begin. The pen felt good in my hand, steady. I wrote slowly, not to be careful, but to be deliberate. A call came just after 9. Loretta. I recognized the ringtone she'd made me assign to her, some jazzy ringtone that annoyed me, which of course made her love it more. I answered and sat on the edge of the bed, curling the notebook into my lap. How'd it go? She asked. Just like you'd expect, I said. Craig showed up with charts, didn't he? He had categories. Loretta laughed the way only someone who had raised 2 sons could. You okay? I am. Actually, I think I'm ready. For what? For a change. There was a pause. Then her voice softened. Listen, there's a local bank, Pine River. I worked there part-time after retirement. They've got a service for widows. Helps them manage accounts privately. Doesn't go through family. I can connect you if you want. I looked down at my notebook. At the list. In the words I had just written. Enough to begin. I think I'd like that, I said. Loretta didn't respond right away. Then, you don't have to do it all at once. Just do the first part. Call them. We talked for a few minutes more, mostly about nothing. Then she said goodnight and hung up. I stayed sitting on the bed for a while. The heater had clicked off, and the silence returned, but it didn't feel as heavy as before. I picked up my phone and opened the web browser, found the bank's website, looked for a contact form, then I closed it. I didn't want to write. I wanted to speak. I dialed the number and waited. A woman answered, bright, cheerful. Her name was Carly. I told her I was recently widowed and needed to understand what options were available for someone like me. She said she was happy to help and that Thursdays were quiet if I wanted to come in. I scheduled an appointment. Thursday, just me and the papers. After they left, I noticed the way the cushions had sunk under their weight. The room felt smaller somehow, even though it was finally quiet again. I stood there holding 2 empty mugs and watched the front door long after it had closed. Not because I was hoping they'd turn back, but because I wasn't ready to return to stillness. There was something unnerving about being spoken to so confidently about your own life, like watching someone rearrange furniture in a house they don't live in. Craig never once asked how I felt about anything he laid out on that spreadsheet. He didn't ask what I wanted. He assumed ease was my goal. That simple meant surrender. Maybe that was the part that stung. Not the numbers, not the planning, but the assumption that I had nothing left to say about it. I walked back into the living room and picked up one of the paper napkins Craig had used. A faint ring of coffee stained the edge. I threw it out. Slowly. Then I sat down, not because I was tired, but because I needed to take up space again, in my own home. The banana bread sat untouched on the plate. I cut a slice for myself and ate it slowly, not out of hunger, but out of something else, something closer to reclaiming. Years ago, when Craig was still in high school, I remembered baking that same bread after his first heartbreak. He'd come home, dropped his backpack by the door, and said nothing for hours. I left a slice in the microwave for him. No note, no lecture, just warmth. That's what mothers do. Now, he sat in the same house, a grown man, telling me where my money should go as if warmth no longer mattered, only structure. That wasn't his fault entirely. I had handed over so much for so long, not just money, responsibility, decisions, space. I let him believe he needed to steer, even when the road was mine to walk. I looked at the clock. It wasn't even noon, but the sun had already shifted. That long, slanted light you only get in cold months. It stretched across the rug and landed on the armchair where he'd sat, explaining my finances to me like I was a client. Or worse, like I was a child. I wasn't angry. I was aware. Fully, finally aware. I stood and folded the blanket on the couch, straightened the pillows, picked up his empty coffee cup and washed it again, even though it was already clean. Then I opened the window a crack, just enough to let the cold air in, just enough to clear the room. I wore my tan coat and my old boots. The more invisible I looked, the better. They were scuffed at the toe and stiff from last winter's salt, but they felt solid. I liked that. The coat still smelled faintly like the attic where I kept it. That mixture of cedar, old paper, and a little dust. I'd hung it out on the back porch for an hour the night before, just to let it breathe. It didn't matter. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. The parking lot was nearly empty when we pulled in. Loretta stayed in the car, engine humming low. She didn't say much on the drive, just let the radio play softly. Old country songs about trains and time gone by. Her hands rested on the wheel like she wasn't really holding it, more like she was giving it permission to guide itself. I sat there for a moment before going in. Checked the appointment time again on the card Carly had given me. 10 a.m., Thursday. My name in tidy print. I folded the card back into my coat pocket. Inside, the bank smelled like pine air freshener, the kind that tried a little too hard. There was a basket of red and white mints on the counter, and a pen chained to one of those little stands, clicking faintly when touched. The chairs were vinyl, the color of weak coffee. Carly came out right on time. Mid-30s, hair pulled back, blouse tucked into slacks. She smiled like someone used to offering comfort, but not sure whether it would be received. I liked her instantly. "Mrs. Winslow?" she said. "Eunice," I replied. "Just Eunice, please." She led me to a small office with a low window. There were 2 chairs, a desk, and a printer humming somewhere nearby. She asked it to act if I wanted coffee or tea. I said no. I just wanted to begin. She opened a file on her computer, clicked through a few screens, then looked at me. "I understand you're interested in opening a private account?" she asked. "I am," I said. "Separate from any family involvement, just me." She blinked, then smiled politely. "Of course. That's common these days. Do you have your statements with you?" I handed her the folder I'd prepared. It wasn't fancy, just copies of the most recent account balances, a few printouts I'd made at the library, and the notes I'd scribbled into the margins the night before. She leafed through them with a little furrow in her brow, not confused, just surprised. "You're very organized." I didn't answer that. I'd never considered myself organized, just careful. There's a difference. We reviewed each account one by one. I told her what I knew, what I wasn't sure of, and what I wanted. I said it plainly, like laying out grocery items on a belt. No apologies, no explanations, just facts. She nodded after everything I said, typing quickly. When she reached the end of my notes, she paused. "Would you like to move all of these today?" "Yes," I said. "All right," she said, smiling again. "That's very doable." The transfer process took longer than I expected, but not because it was difficult. Carly was thorough. She double-checked routing numbers, verified balances, and made polite small talk while the computer loaded page after page. I nodded along, mostly watching her hands move with practiced confidence. At one point, she looked up. "Just to confirm, you're the sole authorized user on all these accounts going forward." Yes, I said. Just me. She paused again, as if that deserved more conversation. But when I didn't offer any, she didn't push. You know, she said after a moment, most folks your age who come in for this kind of thing usually bring a son or daughter, or at least ask them to review the paperwork. I didn't forget, I said. She smiled. Right, just checking. She printed a few documents for signature. The pages were warm from the machine, and the pen clicked faintly as I wrote my name in the assigned boxes. Carly turned each page with care, placing them in a neat stack when I finished. That's it, she said. You're all set. The new account is active. The transfers are in process. You'll get confirmation by mail. I nodded. Do you want a temporary debit card? She asked. No rush, I said. I'm used to cash. I just wanted things clear. They are, she said, handing me the last form. You've got a very clean setup now. We stood. I reached into the peppermint bowl on her desk and took one, just to have something in my hand. Thank you, Carly. My pleasure, she said. Really. Outside, the clouds had settled low over Pine River, the sky the color of pewter. Loretta was still waiting in the Buick, one hand on the wheel, the other wrapped around a styrofoam cup. She didn't roll down the window, just looked at me and raised her brows. I got in, peppermint still in my mouth, the paper crinkling in my pocket. Well, she asked. I did it, I said. She nodded once, like that was enough. Halfway down Main Street, she asked, Were you scared? I looked out the window as the town passed by in slow motion. The diner with its chipped awning, the gas station with flags fluttering in the wind, the pharmacy that always seemed to change ownership but never its beige sign. I was, I said. But not anymore. When I got home, the light in the kitchen had gone gray. I made tea without turning on the overheads, just a little counter lamp. Something about soft light made the quiet feel kinder. I sat with my cup, slowly unwinding the peppermint into a napkin. My phone buzzed on the table. A message from Craig. Hey, Mom, we should talk more about the land titles. Let's meet soon. He doesn't know what's changed. I sat at the kitchen table long after the tea had gone cold. Not because I had anything more to plan. I didn't. Everything that needed doing was done. The folders were back in the drawer. The papers were signed. My name alone was now enough. But even with the practical matters settled, something else had started moving inside me. Slow and unfamiliar. It wasn't a relief, not exactly. And not pride either. It was quieter than that, like a lamp that had been turned on in a far room of a house I'd forgotten I owned. I thought about the first time Craig ever filled out a check for me. I'd just come home from the hospital. He was 12. I had a cast on my leg and painkillers that made everything a little foggy. He sat with my checkbook open on his lap, tongue sticking out the corner of his mouth while he copied my handwriting, careful and small. Back then, it felt like trust. It felt like help. But help has a way of staying too long at the table. Now I was the one watching the numbers. I knew what my heating bill ran in January. I knew the tax line on my retirement statement. Maybe I couldn't talk in spreadsheets the way Craig did, but I'd learned to read between the lines. Outside, the mail truck drove past and paused at the end of the block. I watched it through the window, letting my eyes blur until the red, white, blue colors became one soft stripe. When I went to the cupboard for a new tea bag, I found myself clearing a spot. Moving tins I hadn't opened in months, rearranging shelves, throwing out the old dusty cinnamon sticks I kept for show. It wasn't about tea anymore. It was about space, about what stayed and what no longer had to. On a whim, I pulled open the bottom drawer where Craig had shoved an old accordion folder years ago, the one labeled Mom Stuff. Inside were expired warranties, instruction booklets for appliances I no longer owned, and a handwritten budget he'd made when Martin was still alive, color-coded with projected expenses, and a note in the margin. Let's simplify. I smiled without warmth. It had always been about simplifying, for him. I set the folder on the counter and opened the trash bin, then paused. Not because I had doubts, but because I realized something. Letting go of someone else's version of help doesn't have to be loud. I closed the folder again, not with hesitation, but with intent, and slipped it onto the very back shelf of the hall closet. Out of sight, out of reach, where it belonged. That night, before bed, I added one more line to my notebook. Tomorrow, clean out the top drawer in the bedroom. Not because it needed it, but because I did. Craig showed up with a folder and a plan. I already had one too, just better hidden. He walked in like he always did, wiping his feet on the mat, but never asking if it was a good time. Tina followed behind him, arms crossed, eyes darting around like she wasn't sure if she wanted to be here. I'd set the table with a plate of oatmeal cookies and a pot of tea. It wasn't a special occasion, but I'd been raised to receive guests with something warm. Even when the guests came with spreadsheets, Craig put the folder down like it was a binder of gospel truth, manila, thick with dividers. So, I've been thinking more about the land, he said, pulling out a color-coded map. You're sitting on a lot of value here, Mom, and if we act before next quarter, there's potential for some serious return. He didn't even glance at the pot roast dish in the sink, the tea kettle on the stove, the smell still lingering like it might try to soften something. I looked into a couple firms who specialize in rural parcels. They'd handle everything, clean sale, no stress. We'd retain a portion, of course, but funnel the rest into a structured trust. That way, you don't have to worry about taxes or management. I nodded slowly, like someone being walked through the benefits of a timeshare. That's a lot to take in, I said. He opened another page, showing bar charts. You don't need to worry about all the mechanics, Mom. I'd manage the logistics. Tina and I already talked about streamlining the process. I turned to Tina. She looked down at her lap. Would you like some tea? I asked, and please, she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. Craig didn't want tea. He wanted control. But I poured him a cup anyway. I sat down across from him and folded my hands. Let him keep talking. He had more charts, more projections, more words like liquidate and equity and leveraging current momentum. I let him go on. You see, he said, this isn't just about money. It's about peace of mind. For you, for us. It's about responsible planning. I nodded again, then stood up. Let me show you something, I said. I walked to the kitchen counter where the manila envelope waited, tucked neatly beside the kettle. Not hidden, just uninvited. I picked it up, held it without speaking for a moment. When I returned to the table, I placed it in front of him. He looked at it like it might contain old photos or a recipe. Something benign. What's this? He asked. Documents, I said. Updated ones. He opened the flap and pulled out the first page. Then another. I didn't speak. I watched his eyes scan the headings. Property deeds. Account changes. Everything now listed under my name only. No joint oversight. No co-signatures. He blinked. When did this happen? Last week, I said. I thought it was time I learned how to stand on my own feet again. He didn't respond right away. He set the papers down and reached for his tea, then changed his mind and folded his hands instead. Tina looked at me for the first time since arriving. Her face didn't show shock, more like something else. Curiosity, maybe, or the slow realization that something had shifted. Craig cleared his throat. I didn't realize. I thought we were working on this together. I smiled gently, not to soften the moment, but to hold it steady. I know. That's what made it easy for you to miss what was changing. He nodded slowly, lips pressed together, unsure of his next move. He tapped one finger against the folder, like he was trying to summon the right sentence. I knew that look. Martin had it too, when something didn't go the way he'd mapped out on paper. I guess I just thought, Craig began, then trailed off. He glanced at Tina, as if she might offer him a lifeline, but she didn't. Instead, she picked up her teacup, held it close to her chest, and studied me. Are you mad? Craig finally asked. No, I said, with a calmness that even surprised me. Not mad, just done waiting. For what? To be asked. That landed harder than I expected. He blinked a few times, like something stung behind his eyes. But I didn't press. I didn't need to. Silence settled around us like fog. The gas heater clicked in the background. Outside, the trees swayed against a pale winter sky, brittle branches tapping the glass with small reminders that the world went on, regardless of anyone's plans. I stood up, walked to the sink, and started rinsing out the teacups. Not in a rush, not as a dismissal. Just to keep my hands moving. Behind me, Craig exhaled. So this is... What, Mom? Are you taking over everything now? No, I said, still facing the sink. Just taking back what I gave away too easily. I turned to face him again. You meant well. I know that. But I gave up too quietly. That's on me. He opened his mouth like he might respond, but Tina spoke instead. I think it's brave, she said softly. Her voice wavered but didn't break. Doing this, it takes guts. Craig looked over at her, startled, but said nothing. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and steam. The pot roast lingered, not strong, just enough to remind us of comfort, of effort made without reward. I dried the cups and returned them to their hooks. Craig stood, folder in hand, still unsure of how to leave this version of the room. The version where I wasn't looking to him for instructions. I thought I was helping, he said finally, quieter this time. Maybe you were, I replied, meeting his eyes. But now, so am I. After Craig and Tina left, the house went quiet in that strange way it does after a conversation leaves the air heavy. The heater kept ticking, steady as breath, and the tea had gone cold on the table. I didn't clean up right away. I stood by the counter for a while, tracing the edge of the envelope he'd left behind. Not the manila one. Mine. The one I'd handed him that told a truth he hadn't expected. There was a version of me that once would have felt guilty for doing it without telling him. That part of me still lived somewhere inside, in the folds of habits and years and maternal instinct, but it didn't run the show anymore. I sat back down and opened my small notebook. The same one I used for grocery lists, church events, notes from phone calls. On the last few pages, I'd begun writing things that mattered only to me. Not lists of chores, but choices. Reasons. Reminders that my life still had direction, even if it didn't orbit around someone else's decisions. I wrote down something Loretta once said that hadn't hit me until today. You don't have to make a scene to make a move. I'd made a move today, and it felt like enough. No fireworks, no shouting, just truth, placed gently on the table between cookies and silence. Later, as the sun slipped down behind the garage and the walls turned amber with dusk, I warmed the leftover pot roast and sat at the table alone. I didn't feel lonely. For the first time in a long while, the quiet didn't feel like absence. It felt like space, like a room I could finally stand in without shrinking. I thought about Tina more than Craig. The way she looked at me before she left. Not pity, not surprise. Something closer to respect. It had caught me off guard. Maybe she'd been waiting too, in her own way, for someone to stand up to him. Or maybe she just needed to see what quiet strength looked like when it finally stopped asking permission. I didn't know. But I knew this. When Craig walked out of this house today, he wasn't the only one carrying a plan. There's a difference between being quiet and being blind. I was never blind. The house made all its usual nighttime sounds, the heater clicking on, the hum of the fridge, a soft creak in the hallway I'd never bothered to fix. I sat up in bed, propped by 2 pillows, with my little notebook open in my lap. The lamp on my nightstand gave off a warm yellow light, the kind that made shadows soft and time feel slower. Outside, the window panes were laced with frost. It would be another cold morning. I should have pulled the heavier quilt down from the closet, but I liked the weight of the one I had. It was the same one Martin and I bought on a trip to Ashland years ago. One of those fall getaways where we didn't really talk about anything deep, just shared meals and walked antique shops like we didn't have bigger things waiting at home. I flipped back through some pages in my notebook. Most were grocery lists, thoughts I'd written while the news played low in the background. But near the middle were pieces from after Martin died, little fragments of thought I'd scribbled down in those early quiet weeks when I wasn't sure what was mine anymore. One entry caught my eye. It was dated 2 months after his funeral. Craig wants to handle the bills. He says it's easier this way. Maybe it is. Maybe I don't want to think. I remember writing that. I remember how tired I felt all the time. Back then, handing things over felt like relief. But it wasn't the first time I'd done it. Martin used to say I didn't need to work. What would be the point? He'd ask, pouring coffee and reading headlines. You'd make a couple $100 a month and miss every church event. At the time, it sounded like concern. Maybe it was. But it also closed a door I'd quietly hoped might open. There was a boutique on Main that offered me part-time hours once, just a few afternoons a week. I was excited, really excited. But Martin smiled and said, "Don't be silly. We're doing fine." I didn't argue. I just called and said thank you, but no. I folded that want into a corner of myself and kept moving. That's what you do when you're trying to be at peace in someone else's day. But silence isn't the same as peace. I see that now. I reached for the mug on my nightstand. The tea had gone lukewarm, but it still tasted of chamomile and honey, comforting in a way I didn't realize I still needed. My phone buzzed softly beside the lamp. A text from Loretta. "Still awake? I just remembered something. Call if you're up." I dialed without thinking. She picked up on the first ring. "Did I wake you?" I asked. "No," she said. "I was watching some old movie on the Hallmark Channel. You know how they are. Same plot, different town." I smiled. "Background noise." "Exactly." A pause. "Are you doing all right?" "I'm writing," I said. "About before. About the times I said yes when I meant no." "Ah," Loretta murmured. "That's a lot of years." "It is." There was a kind of hush between us, the gentle kind that doesn't need filling. Then she said, "The neighborhood council has a seat open. Not sure if you'd care, but they need someone who actually listens. Someone who doesn't think the world ends at the edge of their driveway." I blinked. "Why are you telling me?" "Because you've listened to everyone else for 50 years. Maybe it's time someone listened to you." I didn't answer right away. My fingers traced the edge of the notebook page. I'd just written. That wasn't a weakness. That was love. But love doesn't mean silence forever. Loretta didn't push. She never did. "Just think about it," she added. Good night, Eunice. Good night. I sat there a while longer, the phone back on the nightstand, the tea now cold. Then I looked out through the frosted window and said aloud, to no one in particular, maybe I would. I leaned back against the pillows and closed the notebook, letting my hands rest on top of it. My fingers were still warm from holding the mug, and the weight of the leather cover felt familiar, like something I should have held onto a long time ago. It's strange how many things we let slide, thinking they're small. One conversation here, one missed chance there, but they add up. They shape the corners of your life until you look around and realize the walls were never built for you. You just decorated them anyway. Martin wasn't a cruel man. He was just certain about everything. That certainty was comforting when I was young and unsure. It made life feel ordered, predictable, but it also left no room for my own doubt, or curiosity, or questions. I don't think he ever meant to shrink me. But that's the thing about strong personalities. They don't always realize who they're standing in front of. I remember once, early in our marriage, we went to a church potluck. I'd brought a rhubarb crumble, and everyone seemed to love it. One of the ladies from the women's circle asked me if I'd thought about doing a recipe column for the bulletin. I was flattered, giddy even. I told Martin in the car. He chuckled, said, "A recipe column? You'll have more time once the kids are grown. Let's not pile on now." Just like that, the idea was gone, and I let it go. Not because I didn't want it, but because I'd already learned what kinds of ideas got the green light. But I wasn't blind. I knew exactly what was happening, even if I didn't have the words for it then. Back then, I called it harmony. Later, I called it survival. Now, I just call it what it was. Putting myself second for so long, I forgot what first even looked like. I got up to refill my tea. The kitchen was cold, quiet. I didn't bother turning on the overhead light, just the small one over the stove. It cast a gentle glow on the counter where the day's mail still sat. I sorted through it absent-mindedly, but my thoughts stayed elsewhere. I thought of Craig and his folder, his perfect spreadsheets, and how he'd looked at me the other day, confused, like he was seeing me for the first time. Maybe he was. And Tina, poor Tina. She hadn't said much, but I could tell she was listening. The way her eyes followed me when I walked out of the room. The way she held her purse close, like it gave her something to hold onto in the silence. I know that feeling. I brought the tea back to my room and settled again under the quilt. A few more lines made it into my notebook, half thoughts more than full sentences. Maybe I stopped dreaming before I meant to. Power isn't loud. I am still here. The bedside clock ticked softly. There's a kind of courage that doesn't show up in headlines or photo albums, the kind you build slowly, quietly, over years of choosing kindness when your throat burns to scream. That's what I had. That's what I still have. And now that I've remembered it, I'm not setting it down again. I used to think that aging meant softening, that somehow, with each year, the sharp edges would dull. The fears, the regrets, the buried things, until what was left was just peace. But I see now it's not about softening. It's about sharpening into yourself. Finally, all those years, I played the part, smiled at dinner tables, packed lunches with notes, turned the other cheek when I should have raised my voice. And I told myself that's what strong women do. They hold the line. They keep things together. But maybe strong women also leave the room when it no longer fits. Maybe they rewrite the rules when no one's looking. I reached down and pulled an old photo from the drawer. It was me at 23, standing next to Martin outside a gas station on the way to the lake. He had his arm around me, and I was half smiling at something out of frame. It took me a moment to recognize myself. Not because I looked so different, though I did, but because I remembered exactly how I felt at that moment. Like a passenger, like someone waiting to be told what came next. I touched the edge of the photo. She was brave in her own way, brave enough to love, to raise a family, to make a life out of what she had. But I wished I could have told her what I know now, that she didn't have to ask permission to be whole. Outside, the wind had picked up. The branches tapped lightly against the window pane. Somewhere in the distance, I heard a car pass, its tires hushing along the wet road. I thought of Loretta's voice on the phone earlier. "They're looking for someone like you." And how easily I'd laughed it off at first. But even now, that line kept humming underneath everything. Someone like me. Someone who's seen things come and go. Someone who knows what it means to stay quiet for too long. Someone who might finally be ready to speak. I looked around my bedroom, not just as the place I ended each day, but as the space where I'd begun to return to myself. The light from the lamp was soft. My tea had gone cold again. Maybe I would say yes. Maybe I already had, in the quiet. They thought I just came to listen. Turns out, I came to speak. The chairs in Cedar Hollow's community hall were still the folding kind that pinched your legs if you sat wrong. I picked one close to the back at first. Habit more than preference. Old instincts. The kind you don't notice until you try doing something different. I was wearing my soft gray sweater, the one with the pearly buttons that Martin never liked much. Said it made me look too serious. I'd put on lipstick too. Not red. Just enough to say I hadn't faded yet. Loretta was already there when I arrived. She'd saved me a seat near the front, patting the chair beside her like a sister in church. I hesitated only a second before walking down the aisle, past a dozen casual smiles and quiet nods from people who, for years, hadn't known more about me than my banana bread and Christmas cards. They smiled the way small-town folks do when they can't decide if something's changed or if it's always been this way and they're just now noticing. The meeting opened with the usual business: streetlight repairs, lawn complaints, a bake sale that needed volunteers. The woman chairing the meeting, Linda something I think, cleared her throat and said there was still an open seat on the neighborhood council. "If anyone's interested," she added, looking around like she didn't expect any hands. I raised mine. The silence that followed was polite, not stunned. A pause long enough for people to adjust. Then Linda nodded, smiled a little. "Mrs. Rollins?" "Yes," I said. I stood. My knees were steady, my voice too. "I'd like to be considered for the seat." Somewhere behind me, a styrofoam cup squeaked in someone's grip. Linda gestured toward the front. "Would you like to say a few words?" I walked up there without a paper, without a plan, and without the tremble I used to carry when I had to speak in front of people. I just looked at the faces, some familiar, some not, and let the words find their way. "I used to think I didn't have much to offer," I began, not because anyone told me that outright, but because it's easy to think that when your work isn't the kind people put plaques on. A few heads nodded. I was a wife, a mother. I kept a home. I clipped coupons and made do. I listened a lot. To neighbors, to family, to the space between arguments. I paused, not for drama, just to breathe. "And it turns out," I said, "that a lifetime of listening adds up. It teaches you where things crack and where they hold. And maybe that counts for something." When I sat down, Loretta reached over and gave my hand a quick squeeze. She didn't say a word, and she didn't need to. The vote was a show of hands. Almost everyone raised theirs. Someone clapped first, then another. Then the room filled with the kind of gentle applause that feels less like celebration and more like agreement, like people saying, "Yes, this makes sense. I felt it in my chest more than in my ears. Afterward, there was instant coffee in a big metal urn that tasted like burnt beans and memories. Loretta and I stood by the bulletin board, sipping slowly, watching the crowd thin. Someone had posted a flyer for a lost cat, another for a quilting class. There was a notice about pothole repairs and a yellowed announcement from last spring that no one had taken down. "I think you found your lane," Loretta said, not looking at me. "I think maybe I did," I said. And I meant it. We didn't linger. Outside, the air was sharp enough to bite. I pulled my coat tighter, fingers brushing over the keys in my pocket. Real and otherwise. The wind had picked up since we'd gone inside. Leaves rattled against the pavement like they couldn't settle. Loretta offered me a ride home, but I told her I wanted to walk a bit. Let the air work on me. She didn't argue, just nodded and said, "You know where I am." The walk back was only 10 minutes, but it took longer. My boots scuffed the sidewalk in slow rhythm. Streetlights buzzed above me, and every porch I passed seemed to hum with some small, warm domestic life. A television glow here, a dog barking there. I didn't feel outside of it. Not anymore. When I got home, the house greeted me with its usual quiet. No beeping alarms, no recorded messages blinking red. Just the familiar click of the lock, the low sigh of settling walls. I turned the lamp on in the living room, the one with the needlepoint shade Martin had always hated, and hung up my coat. The manila folder was still where I'd left it that morning, next to the teapot. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. Everything inside was already done. The transfers, the titles, the signatures, all legal, all mine. I brewed a small pot of chamomile tea and brought it into the den, where the old recliner waited like an old friend who didn't need explanations. I sat, let the warmth of the mug soak into my palms. For the first time in months, I felt something settle inside me that wasn't fear or worry or calculation. Then the email came. My laptop made that little chime it does when something new arrives. I hadn't been expecting anything, and for a second I debated ignoring it. But old habits, the kind that check in, check up, double check, die slower than pride. It was from Craig. The subject line was simple. "Sorry." I opened it. "Mom, I've been thinking a lot. I didn't realize how much you were holding up. For all of us. I know I came in swinging, trying to help and manage things. But the truth is, I wasn't seeing you. I get it now. At least I'm starting to. You always made things look easy, and I mistook that for simple. But it's not. It never was. I'm sorry. Love, Craig." I read it twice. Not because I didn't believe it, but because some part of me needed to feel the words settle. They didn't undo anything. They didn't excuse the months, the years of decisions made around me, not with me. But they were something. And sometimes, something is enough to start again. I didn't reply right away. I closed the laptop softly, as if the silence that followed was worth keeping intact a bit longer. I let the moment be what it was. Unfinished, but real. I got up and went to the closet, pulled my coat on again. The keys were still in the pocket. I didn't jingle them. I didn't raise them like a trophy. I just walked to the door, hand wrapped around the cold metal of the knob. "He'll figure it out," I whispered into the hallway, just like I did. Then I stepped outside, into the kind of night that feels like a clean page. They say life settles down when you're older, but I've learned it doesn't settle. It shifts, quietly, sometimes painfully, but always toward truth. After all that's happened, I don't feel bitter, just clearer. I still bake on Sundays. I still keep extra creamer for when Tina visits. But now, I sit at the head of my own table, not waiting to be asked, not hoping to be heard. I make decisions, not excuses. It took me decades to understand this. Sacrifice, when constant and silent, can make people forget you have a voice, even the ones you love, especially them. If any of this feels familiar, if you've spent years putting everyone else first, just remember, you're still here. You still matter. And it's not too late to hold your own keys.
I had just signed the papers for the most beautiful house I had ever seen in my life. It took me 65 years to save up every single dollar to buy that property with a yard and 3 spacious bedrooms. Eleanor Vance, a widow retired, but finally the owner of something truly my own. The keys felt heavy in my hand, like a promise fulfilled after decades of working at the textile factory, saving every penny I could. Tomorrow, I would move in. Tomorrow, my new life would begin in that house that smelled of fresh paint and had enormous windows that let in all the light in the world. I had personally chosen every detail, from the furniture to the beige curtains that perfectly matched the brown leather sofas I had bought on an installment plan. Everything was ready. Everything was perfect. Until the phone rang that afternoon. It was Charlotte, my only daughter. With that voice I knew all too well when she needed to ask for something. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something important regarding the new house. Come over for dinner tonight. There's something you need to know." Something in her tone made my stomach knot up. But she was my daughter. I had raised her alone after her father abandoned us when she was just 8 years old. I had given her everything I could. Maybe that's why I never learned to say no to her. I arrived at her house at 7 o'clock sharp, as always. Charlotte greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The table was set for 3, but it was just the 2 of us. "Are we expecting someone else?" I asked as I sat down. "No, Mom. I just wanted you to know that tomorrow, when you move in, you won't be alone in the house." I felt as if a bucket of cold water had been thrown over me. "What do you mean by that, Charlotte?" She poured the coffee without looking at me directly. Her hands were trembling slightly, but her voice sounded determined, almost cold. "My in-laws are going through a tough time. Linda and Robert lost their apartment. And well, Ashley, my husband's sister-in-law, just got divorced and has nowhere to stay." My heart began to beat faster. "And what does that have to do with me?" "They're going to live with you in the new house. It's all arranged. Robert is going to help you with the yard expenses, and Linda can cook for you. Ashley is very neat. She'll help you with the cleaning." I was silent for a moment that felt like an eternity. My daughter's words floated in the air like invisible daggers piercing my chest. "Charlotte, I bought that house, with my money, with my life savings." "Mom, don't be selfish. It's a 3-bedroom house. You have plenty of space." "Selfish." The words escaped my mouth before I could stop them. "I worked for 40 years to buy that house. It's my sanctuary, my place of peace." Charlotte put her cup down on the table with a sharp thud. She looked at me with a coldness I had never seen in her eyes. "Your opinion doesn't matter, Mom. It's already decided. They're arriving with me tomorrow at 10 o'clock in the morning. Linda already has the keys I gave her yesterday." I stood up from the chair, feeling as if the floor were moving beneath my feet. My own daughter, the girl to whom I had given everything, was taking away the only thing that was truly mine. "You gave them keys to my house without asking me?" "It's for the best for everyone, Mom. You'll see, you'll get used to it." I walked out of that house without another word. My legs trembled as I walked to the bus stop. In the reflection of the bus window, I saw an older woman with her eyes full of tears she refused to shed. But somewhere deep in my chest, something more than sadness began to grow. It was rage. It was trampled dignity. It was the silent strength of someone who has been underestimated for far too long. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my old chair, looking out the window, planning exactly what I would do the next day. By dawn, I had everything clear. I woke up with a determination I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just anger that moved me. It was something much deeper. It was the self-respect I had lost somewhere along the way. At 6 o'clock in the morning, I was already dialing numbers on my phone. The first was to the moving company. "Good morning. This is Eleanor Vance. I need to cancel the moving service scheduled for today." "Ma'am, but we already have the truck on its way. If you cancel now, you'll have to pay a penalty." "No problem. Pay it from my deposit." I knew I was losing money, but for the first time in a long time, I felt I was investing in my dignity. The second call was more difficult. It was to the furniture store where I had bought everything for the new house. Mr. Thompson, this is Eleanor Vance. I bought a complete living and dining room set last week. I need to return everything. But ma'am, the furniture has already been delivered to the address you gave us. I know. I'm on my way there with the keys. You can pick everything up this morning. I'll pay for the extra transportation. Are you sure? You'll lose 30% of the value. I am completely sure. My voice was firm, though inside I knew that furniture represented months of extra work at the factory, hours standing in front of the sewing machine, stitches that made my fingers ache at night. The third call was to the cable company. I want to cancel the installation scheduled for today at the new address. Any technical problem, ma'am? No, I just don't need it anymore. The fourth was to the air conditioning technician who was coming to install the unit I had bought on credit. Mr. Davis, I'm canceling today's installation. Mrs. Eleanor, but the unit is already paid for. It just needs to be installed. You can keep it. Consider it a bonus. One by one, I canceled every service. The internet, the landline, the gardening service I had hired to maintain the beautiful yard that had so excited me, the bottled water company that was going to supply me. I even canceled the electrician who was coming to install additional lamps. Each call was like removing a blindfold. I realized how many dreams I had invested in that house. How many sleepless nights I had spent imagining every detail, every moment I would live there. By 7:30, I had finished with all the cancellations. I made myself a strong coffee and sat down to review the house papers. All the documents were in my name. Every signature was mine. Every dollar invested came from my bank account. At 8 o'clock in the morning, I was ready. I put on my dark green dress, the one that made me feel elegant, and headed to my new house. My house that would no longer be my home. The bus ride took 40 minutes. Throughout the journey, other passengers got on and off, each with their morning routines, their jobs, their own lives that seemed more orderly than mine. An elderly woman like me was carrying bags of vegetables from the market. I wondered if she also had children who made decisions for her. When I arrived, the furniture movers were already waiting. I opened the door for them and watched them carry out, one by one, all the pieces I had chosen with so much love. The brown sofa where I planned to read in the afternoons. The dining table where I imagined hosting guests for Christmas. The king-size bed where I dreamed of sleeping peacefully after so many years of worry. Are you sure you want to take everything, ma'am? The foreman asked me. A burly man with a face that showed he understood none of what was happening. Completely sure. It's just, did you not like something? We can exchange a piece for another. No, everything was perfect. I just don't need it here anymore. It was strange to see the house emptying out, but with every piece of furniture that left, I felt lighter. As if I were shedding an illusion that was never really mine. The workers took the new refrigerator, the microwave, the washing machine, even the paintings I had bought to bring life to the walls. One of them asked if they should also take the beige curtains. Yes, take everything that isn't nailed to the wall. When they finished, the house was completely empty. Just the white walls and the echo of my footsteps resonating in the vacant rooms. I walked through each room one last time. The master bedroom where I had dreamed of having my own space. The guest room where I thought a relative might come to visit. The third room I had imagined as my small library. All empty. All echo. I sat on the dining room floor and took a piece of paper and a pen from my purse. It was the same pen with which I had signed the purchase contract just a week ago. I wrote a letter, short, but with each word chosen carefully. Charlotte, Linda, Robert, and Ashley. This house was bought with the money from my 40 years of work. Money I earned by sewing from 5 in the morning until 8 at night, skipping meals to save every penny. Money I saved by denying myself small luxuries for decades to fulfill this dream. If you wanted a free house, you should have asked me before making the decision for me. The keys are on this letter. The house is yours now. Do with it what you will. But don't count on me to finance anyone else's dreams. With all the pain in my heart, but with a clear conscience, Eleanor. How? I left the keys on the letter, in the exact center of what had been the living room. The metallic sound of the keys against the floor echoed through the empty house like a bell announcing the end of something. I walked out without looking back. I closed the front door and walked to the street where the taxi I had called was already waiting. "Where to, ma'am?" "To the city center, the Plaza Hotel." "Do you have any luggage?" "Number, I only have what I need." During the ride, I didn't cry. I had no regrets. I just felt a strange peace, like when you finish cleaning a deep wound. It hurts, but you know it was necessary. At the hotel, I asked for a simple room. I just needed a place to think clearly about what I would do with the rest of my life. The receptionist, a young girl with a kind smile, looked at me with curiosity when I paid for a full week in cash. "Are you on vacation in the city, ma'am?" "No, dear. I'm starting a new life." Her eyes lit up with a mixture of curiosity and admiration. It probably wasn't common to see a woman my age talking about starting over. "How exciting. I hope you enjoy your stay." I went up to the room and sat by the window overlooking the main square. It was a modest but clean room, with a single bed, a small desk, and a view that calmed me. People were rushing around the square, each with their own problems, their own dreams. I wondered how many of them had been betrayed by those they loved most. I opened the window to let in the fresh morning air. There was a bench under a large tree where an old man was feeding pigeons. He looked so serene, so at peace with himself. I hadn't felt that way in years. At 9:45, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Eleanor Vance?" "Yes, this is she. This is James Anderson. I'm your new neighbor. Well, your next-door neighbor." My heart sped up a bit. What could the neighbor want? "Good morning, Mr. Anderson. How can I help you?" "Ma'am, please excuse the intrusion, but something strange is happening at your house. A moving truck arrived about an hour ago, but instead of bringing things in, they're taking everything out." I smiled involuntarily. It was strange to feel that someone was concerned about me, even if it was a stranger. "Don't worry, Mr. Anderson. It's all under control." "Are you sure? Because I also saw the furniture company taking away sofas and a large table. And now there's an appliance truck." His voice sounded genuinely worried. He was an older man. You could tell by his slow, courteous tone. "It's very kind of you to be concerned." "Yes, I authorized all of that." "Ah, well, it's just that yesterday I saw you looking so excited when you were checking out the garden. I thought something bad had happened." "He saw me in the garden yesterday." "Yes, ma'am. I was watering my plants when you arrived with a notebook, writing things down. You looked so happy planning where to put the flowers." A lump formed in my throat. It was true. Yesterday afternoon I had gone to measure the garden, to imagine where I would plant the rose bushes I wanted. It had been one of the happiest moments of the last few weeks. Yes, I had many plans for that garden. "You had? You don't anymore?" There was an awkward silence. I didn't know how to explain to a stranger what had happened. "The situation changed, Mr. Anderson." "Well, Mrs. Vance, I don't meddle in other people's business. But if you need anything, I live alone in the house next door. I'm a widower, too. I know what it's like to be alone at this stage of life." His words went straight to my heart. It had been a long time since someone had spoken to me with such warmth without wanting anything in return. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Anderson. Really. By the way, ma'am, a car just pulled up with 4 people. A very upset young woman and 3 older people with suitcases." At 10:30, my phone rang again. This time it was Charlotte. "Mom, what did you do? The house is completely empty." Her voice was hysterical, furious, but there was something else. There was real panic in her tone. "Hello, Charlotte. How did the move go? Don't play games with me. Where's all the furniture? Where's the television?" "Linda and Robert are standing in an empty house with their suitcases." "Oh, that. I returned it all. I wasn't going to need it." "You're crazy. How could you do such a thing? Do you have any idea what it all cost?" "Of course I know. I paid for it." "Mom, you have to fix this right now. Robert already spent money on gas for the moving truck. Linda brought food to cook today. Charlotte, I don't have to fix anything. You all made a decision for me. Now you can also decide how to solve this." "This is ridiculous. You're being selfish, a bitter old woman." The words hurt more than I expected. It was my daughter talking to me like that. The little girl I had raised with so much love was now screaming at me as if I were her enemy. "Where are you? Come here immediately." I looked out the hotel window. The old man was still feeding the pigeons in the square. He looked calm, unhurried, with no one screaming at him on the phone. "I'm not coming, Charlotte. I've done my part. I bought the house. The rest is your problem." "Mom, this can't be happening. Linda is crying. She says she feels humiliated." "Charlotte, at any point, did you ask yourself how I felt?" "What do you mean?" "Did you ask yourself if I wanted to share my house? If I had worked for 40 years to have permanent house guests? If my dream was to become a free boarding house?" "Mom, don't exaggerate. It was only going to be temporary." "How long? A month? A year? Until they found jobs? And what if they didn't? Was I supposed to kick them out myself?" There was a silence on the other end of the line. "This isn't over, Mom." "You're right, it's not over. Because now I am going to decide what to do with my life. And for the first time in many years, I'm going to decide alone." "Wait, don't hang up." But I had already hung up. I turned off the phone and put it in the nightstand drawer. From the window, I saw a tour bus full of tourists arrive. They got off with cameras and maps, excited to discover the city. They laughed, took pictures, pointed at historic buildings. I wondered when was the last time I had felt that excitement for something new. I decided to go down and walk around the square. I needed fresh air and movement after that call. The square was beautiful. It had large trees that provided shade, wrought iron benches painted green, and a fountain in the center where children ran around while their mothers watched from the benches. I approached the old man feeding the pigeons. He had completely white hair and wore a well-ironed cream-colored shirt. "Good morning," I said. "Good morning, ma'am. Do you like pigeons, too?" To be honest, I've never stopped to watch them. They are very intelligent animals. Each one has its own personality. That gray one over there is very shy, and that white one with spots is the greediest of them all. I watched him feed the birds with breadcrumbs he took from a paper bag. There was something very peaceful in his movements, very deliberate. "You come here every day?" "Every day since I retired. My wife died 5 years ago, and my daughter lives in another country. At first, I came because I didn't know what to do with so much free time. Now I come because the pigeons wait for me." "You don't feel lonely?" "Sometimes. But I've learned that being alone is not the same as being lonely. When you are at peace with yourself, solitude can be very good company." His words resonated in my head like a bell. Being alone is not the same as being lonely. "May I sit for a moment?" "Of course, ma'am. What's your name?" "Eleanor. Eleanor Vance." "A pleasure, Mrs. Vance. I am James Anderson." "James Anderson?" "Yes, why?" "We've met. You called me this morning. You're my neighbor." He stared at me with wide eyes. "You are the lady from the new house? The one with the garden?" "I was. Not anymore." James stopped feeding the pigeons and looked at me attentively. "What happened, Mrs. Vance?" And for the first time since last night, I felt the urge to tell someone the whole truth. I told James everything. From the moment I signed the papers for the house to Charlotte's furious call that morning. He listened without interrupting, nodding from time to time, his eyes reflecting an understanding I hadn't found in anyone for a long time. "Mrs. Vance," he said when I finished my story, "you did the right thing. Do you really think so?" "Of course. I have 3 children, and since I was widowed, all 3 have had brilliant ideas about what I should do with my house, with my money, with my time. The oldest wants me to move into a nursing home so he can sell my house. The middle one wants me to lend him money for his business. And the youngest wants me to move in with her to take care of her children for free. And what do? I tell them no. At first, they got angry. They stopped visiting for months, but then they realized their old man wasn't a fool they could manipulate. James was right, but it hurt so much to come to that realization. It's just that Charlotte is my only daughter. I raised her alone after her father left. And for that very reason, Mrs. Vance, you gave her everything. Now she believes she has a right to everything of yours." A pigeon came close to my feet and looked at me expectantly. James gave me some crumbs. "Here, this one is named Hope. She's the bravest of them all." Feeding Hope calmed me. There was something comforting in that small act of generosity without expectations. James, can I ask you something? Of course. How did you learn to be alone without being lonely? He thought for a moment, looking towards the fountain where a young mother was chasing her little son. I think I started to understand it when I stopped expecting others to fill my life and started to fill it myself. At first, it was hard. I was used to my day revolving around my wife, also named Hope. When she died, I didn't know what to do with myself. And what did you do? I started small. I got up one day and decided to learn how to cook something other than fried eggs. Then I decided to fix the broken things in the house myself instead of calling my children. After that, I started going for walks with no particular destination. And when did you know you were okay? The day I realized I could spend a whole day without looking at the phone, waiting for someone to call. The day I woke up excited about something I was going to do for myself. His words hit me deeply. It had been years since I had woken up excited about something that was just for me. James, do you think I'm too old to start over? Mrs. Vance, my grandmother started learning piano at 70. She said she had been too busy raising children and grandchildren to do something for pure fun. She died at 85 playing a waltz. I smiled for the first time in days. Really? Really? And you're 65. You have at least 20 years to learn piano, painting, dancing, French cooking, whatever you can think of. I was quiet for a moment, watching as Hope pecked at the crumbs around my feet. James, can I tell you a secret? Of course. My whole adult life, I dedicated myself to being the perfect mom for Charlotte. I worked, cooked, cleaned, helped her with her homework, went to school meetings. I never had time to ask myself what I liked. And now? Now I realize I don't even know what my favorite color island. I always bought clothes thinking about what was practical, not what I liked. What color are you wearing today? I looked at my dark green dress. Green. Do you like it? Yes. It makes me feel elegant. Then that might be a good place to start getting to know yourself. At that moment, my phone rang. It was Charlotte again. This time I didn't turn it off, but I didn't answer either. I let it ring until it stopped. It's your daughter. Yes. Are you going to answer? Not yet. I need time to think. James nodded understandingly. Mrs. Vance, may I give you some advice? Please. Don't make important decisions when you're angry, but don't make them when you're scared either. Make them when you're calm. And how do I know when I'm calm? When you can think about the problem without your chest hurting. I took a deep breath. My chest still hurt when I thought about Charlotte. Then I'm not ready yet. There's no rush, Mrs. Vance. Time is the only thing we truly have. We sat in silence, feeding the pigeons for almost an hour. It was a comfortable silence, without pressure, without expectations. It had been years since I had experienced that feeling of peace. James, can I ask you something else? As many times as you like. Do you think I'm a bad mother for doing what I did? James stopped handing out crumbs and looked me directly in the eyes. Mrs. Vance, is a good mother one who allows her child to trample all over her? Is a good mother one who teaches her child that they can make decisions for others without consulting them? Is a good mother one who accepts anything to avoid conflict? Then you were not a bad mother. You were a mother who finally decided to teach her daughter a very important lesson. What lesson? That actions have consequences. And that respect is not optional, not even between family. His words comforted me more than I had expected. Do you know what hurts the most, James? What? That when Charlotte screamed at me on the phone, she didn't sound sorry for disrespecting me. She sounded furious that her plan didn't work. That hurts, I know, but it's also giving you very valuable information about who your daughter really is at this moment in her life. What do you mean? That maybe the Charlotte you raised, the sweet and grateful little girl, got lost somewhere along the way. But that doesn't mean she can't find herself again. And if she never finds herself, then you will have learned something painful but necessary, and you can decide how to relate to her based on reality, not on your hopes. The phone rang again. This time it was an unknown number. Mrs. Eleanor Vance? Yes? This is Linda. Well, I was going to be your... This is very awkward. Linda sounded nervous, embarrassed. Hello, Linda. Mrs. Vance, I wanted to apologize. I didn't know that Charlotte hadn't consulted you about us living with you. I really didn't know. No, ma'am. She told us that you had insisted we come live with you because you were very lonely, that you wanted company. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. That's what she told you? Yes, ma'am. That's why we accepted. We thought we were doing you a favor. When we arrived this morning and saw your face when you got the call from Charlotte, we realized something wasn't right. Linda, where are you now? At the house, ma'am. We don't know what to do. Robert is trying to calm Charlotte down, but she's beside herself. And Ashley, well, Ashley says this is very awkward and that we should just leave. And what do you want to do? Mrs. Vance, we don't want to cause you any problems. If you prefer that we find another place, we will go. For the first time since yesterday, someone was speaking to me with respect and consideration. Linda, can I ask you something? Of course, ma'am. Do you really need a place to live? Yes, ma'am. We lost our apartment because the owner is going to demolish it. We have 1 month to find something, but with the pension we receive, it's very difficult to find something decent. I understand. Mrs. Vance, what Charlotte did was very wrong. You had every right to decide about your own house. James was looking at me intently. I could see in his eyes that he was realizing something important was happening in that conversation. Linda, may I think about it? Of course, ma'am. And again, I apologize for this misunderstanding. When I hung up, James asked, "What are you going to do?" I don't know yet, but I think I'm starting to understand something. What? That maybe the problem wasn't them coming to live with me. The problem was that nobody asked me if I wanted them to. James nodded slowly, as if he had been waiting for me to reach that conclusion. Mrs. Vance, there is a big difference between helping because one wants to and being forced to help. Exactly. If Linda and Robert really need help, and if they had asked me respectfully, I might have said yes. But Charlotte decided for me, and that's what I can't forgive. And what do you plan to do now? I watched the pigeons. Hope had brought 2 others, and now the 3 of them were pecking near our feet. It was as if they had formed a small family around us. I think I'm going to talk to Linda and Robert, but without Charlotte present. That seems sensible. James, do you think I'm foolish for considering helping them after everything that's happened? No, Mrs. Vance. I think you're being wise. You are separating the people who acted with respect from the one who did not. That afternoon, I returned to the hotel and called Linda. Linda, this is Eleanor Vance. Mrs. Vance, how are you? I'm fine. Linda, could you, Robert, and I talk? Without Charlotte. Of course, ma'am. Where would you like to meet? Do you know the Hope Cafe downtown? Yes, ma'am. Can you be there at 5 o'clock this afternoon? Of course. And Ashley? Can she come too if she wants? I'll ask her and confirm. An hour later, I arrived at the cafe. It was a small, cozy place, with wooden tables and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee floating in the air. Linda and Robert were already there, sitting at a table in the back. They looked nervous but respectful. Linda was a woman in her 60s, with gray hair pulled back in a simple bun and a pale yellow blouse. Robert looked a few years older, with a white mustache and a well-ironed light blue shirt. They both stood up when they saw me arrive. Mrs. Vance, thank you so much for agreeing to talk with us, Robert said, extending his hand. Please, sit down. We settled at the table. The waitress came over, and we ordered coffee for the 3 of us. Ashley isn't coming? No, ma'am, Linda replied. She says this is very awkward, and she prefers to find another solution. I understand. Well, I wanted to talk to you to clear some things up. Of course, Mrs. Vance. First, I want you to know that I'm not angry with you. I'm angry with my daughter for the way she handled this whole situation. Linda and Robert exchanged a look of relief. Second, I want to understand exactly what Charlotte told you and what your real situation island. Robert took the lead. Mrs. Vance, we lived in an apartment in the San Miguel neighborhood for 15 years. The owner of the building died, and his heirs decided to sell the land to a developer. They gave us 3 months' notice to vacate. And you haven't been able to find another place? We've been looking, ma'am, Linda continued, But with our retirement pension, most of the places we can afford are in very poor condition or in very dangerous neighborhoods. How much is your pension? Between the two of us, about $400 a month, Robert replied. It was a small amount. I understood why they were having trouble finding something decent. And how do you know Charlotte? She's our daughter-in-law, Linda explained. She's been married to our son Michael for 8 years. Is Michael on board with you living in my house? Linda and Robert looked at each other uncomfortably. Well, Mrs. Vance, Robert said, Michael is working in another country. He left 6 months ago to look for better job opportunities. Does he know what happened today? We sent him a message telling him, but with the time difference, he hasn't responded yet. The waitress brought our coffees. I took a sip while processing the information. Linda, Robert, I want to ask you a direct question. Did you really believe that I had insisted you come live with me? Linda looked down. At first, yes, ma'am. Charlotte told us that you felt very lonely in that big house and had mentioned that you would like some company. But when we arrived this morning and saw your face when you received the call from Charlotte, we realized something wasn't right, Robert admitted. What made you realize that? The way Charlotte was screaming at you on the phone, Linda said. A daughter doesn't scream at her mother like that unless she knows she's doing something wrong. I was surprised by their perceptiveness. And what do you plan to do now? Mrs. Vance, Robert said, we don't want to be a burden to anyone. If you prefer that we find another place, we completely understand. But what would you do? Where would you go? We have some savings, Linda explained. We could rent a room in a boarding house for a month or two while we look for something more permanent. A room for both of you? Yes, ma'am. It's not ideal, but we've lived in worse conditions. I looked at both of them. They were humble, polite people who were in a difficult situation through no fault of their own. It was very different from the image I had formed in my head of freeloaders who wanted to live for free. Linda, Robert, may I make you a proposal? Of course, ma'am. What would you think if we tried an arrangement for 1 month? They looked at each other, surprised. What kind of arrangement, Mrs. Vance? You can stay in the house. I will pay for the necessary basic furniture. A bed, a small table, 2 chairs, a used refrigerator. Nothing fancy, but functional. Ma'am, we can't accept that without paying you something, Robert protested. Let me finish. You would help me. Robert, could you maintain the garden and do minor repairs? Linda, if you like to cook, could you prepare food for me a few times a week? And where would you live? Linda asked. I'll stay in my hotel room for now. I need time to think about what I want to do with my life. But Mrs. Vance, Robert said, it's your house. You should live there. Robert, after what happened, that house no longer feels like my home. Maybe later, but not now. Linda had tears in her eyes. Mrs. Vance, why would you do this for us after everything that's happened? Because you are treating me with respect. Because you are asking me instead of deciding for me. And because I believe everyone deserves a second chance. And what about Charlotte? Robert asked. Charlotte will have to learn that actions have consequences. If she wants to be part of this arrangement, she will have to apologize to me first. And she will have to prove that she can respect me. Do you think she will? I don't know, but that's her decision. Linda reached out and touched my hand across the table. Mrs. Vance, you are an angel. No, Linda, I'm just a woman who is learning to set boundaries. When could we start? Tomorrow, if you like. I'll take care of buying the basics and having them delivered. And how much would we pay for rent? $100 a month to cover basic utilities, and you'll be in charge of the food. Robert and Linda looked at each other, excited. Mrs. Vance, Robert said. That's less than what we were paying in the old apartment. I know, but I'm not doing this for money. I'm doing it because I believe it's the right thing to do. What do you need us to do? Keep the house clean and well-maintained. Respect me as the owner. And understand that this is a temporary arrangement while we all decide what we want to do long-term. Perfect, ma'am, they said at the same time. There's one more condition. What is it? If Charlotte shows up at the house without having spoken to me first, you are not to let her in. This is my house, and I decide who can be there. Understood, Robert said firmly. And Ashley? Ashley decided to find another place. She says she doesn't want to be in the middle of family problems, Linda explained. Better for everyone. We talked for another hour. They told me about their lives, their previous jobs, their worries. They were good people who had simply had bad luck. It was refreshing to talk to people who treated me like a person with a right to an opinion about my own life. When we said goodbye, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, that I had made a decision for myself based on what I considered right, without letting others decide for me. That night, as I was having dinner alone in my hotel room, my phone rang. It was Charlotte. This time, I answered. Hello, Charlotte. Mom, Linda told me they're going to live in the house anyway. That's right. But that's exactly what I had planned from the beginning. No, Charlotte. What you had planned was to force me to accept house guests without consulting me. What I decided was to help Linda and Robert because they asked me with respect. It's the same thing. It's not the same thing. And if you can't see the difference, then we have a much bigger problem than I thought. Mom, I don't understand why you're being so dramatic, Charlotte continued. In the end, everyone wins. Linda and Robert have a place to live, you have company, and I can rest easy knowing you're not alone. Her words confirmed that she truly didn't understand what she had done wrong. Charlotte, do you hear what you're saying? What do you mean? You're talking as if I were an object to be managed, as if my house were yours to dispose of, as if my feelings don't matter. Oh, Mom, don't exaggerate. I'm not exaggerating. Let me give you an example. How would you feel if I showed up at your house tomorrow and told you I decided 3 people are going to live with you without asking you? That's different. Why is it different? Because you're my mom. And because I'm your mom, I don't have the right to decide about my own life? There was a silence on the other end of the line. Mom, I just wanted to help. Charlotte, if you really wanted to help, you would have asked me first. You would have said, Mom, Linda and Robert need a place to live. Would you be okay with them staying with you for a while? And then I would have been able to decide. And you would have said yes. Possibly. But we'll never know because you didn't give me the chance to choose. Charlotte sighed. Okay, Mom, maybe I should have asked you first. Not maybe, Charlotte. You definitely should have asked me. I already said maybe I should have done it differently. What more do you want? Her tone was still defensive, as if she were doing me a favor by partially admitting her mistake. I want you to understand that what you did was wrong. Not maybe wrong, wrong. Oh my God, Mom, what do you want? For me to get on my knees and beg for your forgiveness? I want you to respect that I am an adult capable of making my own decisions. I want you to understand that you cannot dispose of my life without consulting me. And yes, I want a sincere apology, not a half-hearted one. This is ridiculous. For you, maybe. For me, it's very important. You know what, Mom? Do whatever you want. You've always been very stubborn anyway. And she hung up. I stared at the phone for several minutes. It was incredible how Charlotte had managed to turn me into the problematic one in the situation. According to her, I was dramatic, exaggerated, and stubborn. At no point had she truly taken responsibility for her actions. I couldn't sleep that night. I tossed and turned in bed, thinking about all the times Charlotte had made decisions for me over the years. Small things that, at the time, I had let slide because it was easier or because she just wanted to help. The time she decided I needed to change doctors because mine was too old. The time she gave away my antique sewing machine because I wasn't using it anymore, without asking me. The time she canceled my newspaper subscription because the news only depressed me. I realized that the issue with the house wasn't an isolated event. It was the culminating pattern of years of disrespect, disguised as care. The next day, I got up early and went to buy used furniture. I found a store that sold things in good condition at reasonable prices. I chose a simple queen bed, a small dining table with 2 chairs, a refrigerator that worked well, and a modest but comfortable sofa. Is this all going to the same address? The salesman asked. Yes, and I need it delivered this afternoon. Are you furnishing a whole house? Something like that. Then I went to the supermarket and bought basic provisions: rice, beans, oil, salt, some canned goods, coffee, sugar, enough for Linda and Robert to cook for the first few days. At 3 in the afternoon, I arrived at the house. Linda and Robert were waiting for me on the front lawn, sitting on the porch with their 2 suitcases beside them. "Mrs. Vance, we didn't know if you were coming," Linda said, getting up quickly. "I told you I would, and here I am." "What should we do with the keys?" Robert asked. "Charlotte took the ones she had, and we don't know if you want us to keep them." "I have my set of keys. I'll give you copies later." The delivery trucks arrived an hour later. It was satisfying to see the empty house fill with life again, but this time under my own terms. Linda and Robert worked with me to arrange everything. Robert turned out to be very handy at assembling furniture, and Linda had a good eye for organizing spaces functionally. "Mrs. Vance," Linda said as we were setting up the kitchen, "we don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank me. This works out for all of us." "When are you going to move in?" "I don't know yet. I need time to think." The truth was, I liked the independence of the hotel. For the first time in a long time, I had a space that was completely my own, where no one could enter without my permission, where I could make decisions without consulting anyone. "Mrs. Vance," Robert said, "my son Michael called last night from the United States." "Oh yes? And what did he say?" "He's very embarrassed about what Charlotte did. He says he never asked her to find us a house, and that he didn't know she had done all this without consulting you." "Is Michael coming back soon?" "No, ma'am. He got a good job there and plans to stay for at least 2 more years. But he says that when he comes back, he will take responsibility for us." "And what do you want to do?" Linda and Robert looked at each other. "Mrs. Vance," Linda said, "if you would allow us to stay here for those 2 years, we would save enough to put down a deposit on a small apartment when Michael returns." "That's a long time." "We know. If it seems too long, we can look for something else." I looked at both of them. In 2 days, they had shown me more consideration and respect than my own daughter had in years. "Let's see how the first month goes," I told them. "If we're all comfortable, we can talk about extending the arrangement." Their faces lit up. "Really? Really?" That afternoon, while Linda was cooking and Robert was working in the garden, I sat on the front porch reading a book I had bought at the hotel. It was a novel about a woman who travels through Europe alone after being widowed. It had been years since I had read for pleasure. James appeared in his garden and greeted me from across the fence. "Mrs. Vance, how are things going?" "Very well, James. Have you met Linda and Robert?" "Yes, they're very nice. Robert offered to help me with pruning my trees. They're good people." James came over to the fence that separated our yards. "And how do you feel about your decision?" "I feel good. I feel like I've taken back control of my life." "And your daughter?" "Charlotte still doesn't understand what she did wrong, but that's her problem, not mine." James nodded. "Mrs. Vance, may I say something?" "Of course. Since I've known you, which has only been 2 days, I've seen you change. Yesterday you looked like a defeated woman. Today you look like a woman who knows what she wants." His words touched my heart. "Thank you, James." "Are you going to stay for dinner with Linda and Robert?" "No, I'm going back to the hotel. I still need my space." "That seems very wise." That night, as I was having dinner at the hotel restaurant, the young receptionist who had checked me in on the first day approached me. "Mrs. Vance, how is your new life?" "It's going very well, thank you." "Can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "How did you know it was time to change?" The question surprised me. "Why do you ask?" "It's just that I'm 25 years old, and I feel like everyone makes decisions for me. My boyfriend, my parents, my boss. Sometimes I feel like I don't have a voice in my own life." I recognized myself in her words. "Do you know what made me change?" "What?" "Realizing that if I didn't defend my right to decide about my life, no one else would." "But weren't you scared?" "Terrified. But I was more scared of continuing to live as if my opinion didn't matter." The girl smiled. "You are very brave." "I'm not brave. I'm just tired of being invisible in my own life." I slept better that night than I had in a long time. For the first time in years, I felt in control of my destiny. But I knew the hardest part was yet to come. The next morning the phone woke me up. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Eleanor Vance?" "Yes, who is this?" "This is Michael, Charlotte's husband. I'm calling from the United States." My heart sped up. Michael had always been respectful to me. but we hadn't spoken in months. "Hello, Michael. How are you?" "Mrs. Vance, first I want to offer you a huge apology for what happened. My parents told me everything, and I am so embarrassed." "Michael, you don't have to apologize for something you didn't do." "Yes, I do, because Charlotte is my wife, and she acted in the name of my family without my permission." "Have you spoken to her?" "Last night we had a very long conversation. Very long and very difficult. And, Mrs. Vance, I didn't know that Charlotte had lied to my parents. I never asked her to find them a house, much less to force you to take them in." "What did she say when you confronted her?" Michael sighed deeply. "At first, she tried to justify herself, saying she just wanted to help everyone. But when I asked her why she hadn't consulted you first, she got defensive. And then I asked her why she had lied to my parents, telling them you wanted company. That's when she got furious and told me I didn't understand because I wasn't here." "Michael, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Does Charlotte have a habit of making decisions for others without consulting them?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Mrs. Vance, I'm ashamed to admit it, but yes. It's part of the reason I decided to come work here." "What do you mean?" "Charlotte, well, she's always had a tendency to want to control everything. At first, I thought it was because she cared so much about the family. But then I realized she doesn't like others making decisions, not even about their own lives." His words hurt, but they didn't surprise me. "And how is she with you?" "With my parents. She has always been very bossy. She tells them which doctors they should see, what medicines they should take, what television shows are good for them. At first, my parents allowed it because they thought it was love. And now? Now my parents told me they're tired of her making decisions for them. That's why, when you proposed the arrangement by consulting them and respecting their opinion, they were so relieved." "Michael, do you think Charlotte can change?" "I don't know, Mrs. Vance. Last night I told her she had to apologize to you sincerely. I explained that what she had done was very wrong." "And what did she say?" "That you were exaggerating, and that in the end, everything had turned out fine because my parents had a place to live." "So she still doesn't get it?" "No, Mrs. Vance, she doesn't get it. I was processing the information. It was painful to hear that the problem with Charlotte was deeper than I had thought." "Michael, what are you planning to do?" "Mrs. Vance, I'm coming back in a year and a half. When I return, my parents are going to come live with me. But in the meantime, if you are willing to continue helping them, I will send you money every month to cover the expenses." "That's not necessary, Michael. The arrangement I have with them is working well." "I insist, Mrs. Vance. It's the least I can do after all this trouble." "And what does Charlotte think of that?" "Charlotte is going to have to learn to live with the consequences of her decisions." After hanging up with Michael, I sat thinking for a long time. It was clear that Charlotte had a serious problem with control and respect for others. But it was also clear that I had been part of the problem by allowing this behavior for years. I decided to go for a walk in the square to clear my head. James was on his usual bench feeding the pigeons. "Good morning, Mrs. Vance. How did you wake up?" "With a lot on my mind, James." "Do you want to tell me?" I told him about the conversation with Michael. James listened attentively while the pigeons pecked around our feet. "Do you know what hurts the most, James?" "What?" "Realizing that I allowed Charlotte to develop this behavior. Every time she made decisions for me and I said nothing, I was teaching her it was okay to do so." "Mrs. Vance, you can't blame yourself for wanting to avoid conflict with your daughter. But by avoiding small conflicts, I allowed a much larger conflict to be created. That's true, but it's also true that it's never too late to change the dynamic." "But what if Charlotte doesn't want to change?" James looked at me with those wise eyes that were now familiar to me. "Then you will have to decide what kind of relationship you want to have with someone who doesn't respect you." His words were harsh but necessary. "James, do you think I'm a bad mother for setting boundaries so late?" "Mrs. Vance, a bad mother is one who never sets boundaries. A good mother is one who sets them when she realizes they are necessary, regardless of how old her children are." That afternoon, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years: go shopping for myself. Not for practical or necessary clothes, but for something I liked simply because I liked it. I went into a clothing store I had always looked at from the outside but never visited. A young saleswoman approached. Can I help you with anything? I'm looking for something different. Something to make me feel good about myself. What colors do you like? I thought for a moment. It had been so long since I had only bought clothes in black, gray, or brown because it was practical. I like green. And gold. Perfect. I have a few things I think you'll love. I tried on several dresses and blouses. It was strange to see myself in the mirror in vibrant colors after so many years of muted tones. That emerald green dress looks beautiful on you, the saleswoman told me. Do you have a special event? Number? I just want to feel good. That's the best reason to buy new clothes. I bought the emerald green dress, a golden blouse, and a necklace of orange beads I would never have considered before. It was the first time in years I had spent money on something completely unnecessary, but that made me happy. When I returned to the hotel, the receptionist looked at me with admiration. Mrs. Vance, you look beautiful in that color. Thank you, dear. Can I ask you something? Of course. How do you find the courage? Yesterday, my boyfriend told me I couldn't go out with my friends because he had other plans for us, and I just accepted. What would you have wanted to do? Tell him that he can make his plans, but I already had mine. And why didn't you tell him that? Because I'm afraid he'll get angry. And does it seem normal to you to be afraid of your own partner? The girl thought for a moment. No, I guess not. Dear, no one who truly loves you should make you afraid to express your opinion. Do you think I should talk to him? I think you should ask yourself what kind of relationship you want to have. One where your voice matters, or one where you have to ask for permission to live your own life. That night, as I was having dinner in my room, the phone rang. It was Charlotte. Mom, Michael called me. And? He says I have to apologize to you. And what do you think? I think everyone is overreacting to all of this. Charlotte, do you really believe you did nothing wrong? Look, Mom, maybe I could have handled it better, but my intentions were good. Intentions don't justify the methods, Charlotte. What do you want me to do? Get on my knees and beg for forgiveness for trying to help? I want you to understand that what you did was wrong, that you respect that I am an adult, and yes, I want a sincere apology. This is ridiculous. For you, maybe. For me, it's the difference between having a relationship with you or not. Are you threatening me? I'm not threatening you. I'm explaining the consequences of your actions. You know what, Mom? Do whatever you want. You've always been so dramatic anyway. Charlotte, when you are ready to talk to me like an adult who respects another adult, call me. Until then, we are not going to talk. Seriously? Seriously. You can't be serious. Very serious. And I hung up. It was the first time in my life I had hung up on my daughter. It was the first time I had set a clear and definitive boundary. My hands were shaking, but inside I felt a strange calm. I had taken control of my life. Now Charlotte would have to decide if she wanted to be a part of it under my conditions, or if she preferred to continue believing she could trample on me without consequences. For the first time in years, the decision was not mine, it was hers. The following days were strange but liberating. For the first time in a long time, my phone wasn't constantly ringing with Charlotte asking for something or complaining about something. It was as if I had reclaimed a silence I didn't know I had lost. I established a routine that I liked. I would wake up early, have breakfast at the hotel restaurant, go for a walk in the square with James and his pigeons, and then visit Linda and Robert to see how things were going at the house. Linda had turned out to be an excellent cook. When I arrived, she always had fresh coffee and some homemade dessert waiting for me. Mrs. Vance, she told me one day as we were having coffee in the kitchen, "Can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course, Linda. Don't you miss living in your house?" I thought about it. It was a question I had asked myself several times. I miss the idea of the house, but I don't miss the anxiety of feeling like I had no control over my own space. Do you think you'll ever want to go back? Maybe. When I feel like it's truly my home and not just a house where others make decisions for me. No, Robert came in from the garden with his hands full of dirt. "Mrs. Vance, the roses we planted last week are blooming very well." It was true. Robert had transformed the garden into something beautiful. He had planted vibrantly colored flowers, fixed the irrigation system, and created small paths among the bushes. "It looks beautiful." Robert, do you want us to plant something special somewhere? What do you suggest? There's a corner by the living room window that gets sun all morning. It would be perfect for an herb garden. I love the idea. As Robert explained his plans for the garden, I realized that this was what I had imagined when I bought the house. Quiet conversations about simple but important things, plans made jointly, with mutual respect. Linda, Robert, I said suddenly, can I ask you something? Of course, ma'am. Are you happy with this arrangement? They looked at each other and smiled. Mrs. Vance, Linda said, we haven't felt this peaceful in years. Why? Because you treat us like people, Robert explained. You ask for our opinion, you respect our decisions, you make us feel useful without making us feel like a burden. That's exactly how I like to be treated, I replied. That afternoon, on my way back to the hotel, I ran into James in the square. Mrs. Vance, do you have a minute? Of course, James. What's up? I wanted to tell you something that happened today. We sat on our usual bench. This morning, a young woman came to my house asking for you. She said she was your daughter. My heart sped up. Charlotte went to look for you? Yes. She asked me if I knew where you were living. And what did you tell her? I told her it wasn't my place to give out information about you without your permission. How did she react? She got very upset. She told me you were her mother and she had a right to know where you were. And? I told her the only right she had was the one you chose to give her. I was surprised by James's loyalty. We had only known each other for 2 weeks, but he was protecting me as if we were lifelong friends. What else happened? Then she went to the house and knocked on the door. Linda opened it. Did Linda tell her where I am? Linda told her you had been very clear. If Charlotte wanted to talk to you, she had to call you first. And how did Charlotte react? She got furious. She yelled at Linda that it was her house too, and that she had a right to come in. But she didn't come in? Robert came out and calmly explained that you were the owner of the house and that they were going to respect your instructions. And then Charlotte yelled at them that everyone was conspiring against her and left very angry. I was processing the information. It was painful to know that my daughter had gone looking for me, but it was also comforting to know that the people I had chosen to surround myself with were respecting my boundaries. James, do you think I was wrong not to talk to her? Mrs. Vance, had you clearly told her what your conditions were for talking? Yes. I told her she had to apologize sincerely and acknowledge that what she did was wrong. And had she met those conditions? Then you did nothing wrong. You set clear boundaries, and you are maintaining them. I had trouble sleeping that night. A part of me wanted to call Charlotte and fix things. But the more rational part knew that giving in now would mean going back to the same old pattern. The next day, I decided to do something I had been putting off for weeks. Find new activities for my free time. I found a community center that offered dance classes for senior citizens. I had never danced in my life, but something about the idea appealed to me. You've never danced? The instructor, a cheerful woman in her 50s, asked me. Never, but I've always wanted to learn. Perfect. There's no pressure here, just fun. The class was small, only 8 people, all over 60. There were 3 men and 5 women, all with stories similar to mine, people who had dedicated decades to caring for others and now wanted to do something for themselves. I'm Abigail. A woman with silver hair and a fuchsia dress introduced herself. I started coming after my husband died. At first, I came because I didn't know what to do with so much free time, but now I come because I love it. I'm Daniel, said a slim man in a white shirt. My kids told me I should stay home and watch television, but I wanted something more active. And what did they say when you told them you were coming to dance classes? I asked. At first, they made fun of me. Then, when they saw how happy I was, they stopped having an opinion. The class was fun, albeit clumsy. My feet didn't coordinate well with the music, but I laughed more than I had in months. How did it feel? The instructor asked me at the end. Like I woke up a part of me that was asleep. That's exactly the idea. When I left the community center, I felt different, lighter, younger, more alive. I decided to walk through the downtown area instead of taking the bus. There were shops I had never noticed, cafes with live music, a small bookstore with a travel section. I went into the bookstore and lost myself among the shelves. There were books about countries I had never considered visiting, guides for women traveling alone, stories of people who had changed their lives after 60. "Can I help you?" The bookseller, an older man with glasses and a kind smile, asked me. "I'm looking for. I don't know exactly what I'm looking for." Those are the best customers. "What kind of things do you like?" "Stories of people who started over when they thought it was too late." "I have exactly what you need." He took me to a special section and showed me several books. One immediately caught my eye. "It's Never Too Late to Be Who You Want to Be." "This one is very popular with our customers over 60, he told me. I bought the book and sat in a nearby cafe to read it. The first chapter talked about how many people spend decades living the life others expect of them, until one day they realize they have never asked themselves what they really want. It was as if the book had been written for me. My phone rang. It was Linda. "Mrs. Vance, I'm sorry to bother you." "You're not bothering me, Linda. What's wrong?" Charlotte came by again. "Yes?" This time she came with a man who says he's a lawyer. My blood ran cold. "A lawyer? What for?" "He says he wants to review the house papers because she has a legal right to live here." "Where are they now?" "They left when Robert told them they couldn't come in without a court order." "Robert knew that?" His son Michael had explained to him over the phone what to say if something like this happened. "Michael knew this could happen?" "Yes, ma'am. Apparently, Charlotte told him she was going to seek legal help to resolve the issue." I hung up and immediately called Michael. "Mrs. Vance, I imagine why you're calling." "Michael, what's going on?" "Charlotte hired a lawyer to see if she can force you to let her live in the house." "Can she do that?" "No, Mrs. Vance. The house is completely in your name. You can decide who lives there and who doesn't." "Then why is she trying?" "Because she's desperate, and because she truly believes she has the right to make decisions about your life." "Michael, what are you going to do?" "I've already done something. I told Charlotte that if she continues with this, when I come back, I will not be financially responsible for her." "Really?" "Very seriously. Mrs. Vance, what Charlotte is doing is wrong, and it's time someone told her that clearly." When I hung up, my hands were shaking. It was incredible how far Charlotte was willing to go to get her way. But I also realized something important. I no longer felt alone in facing this. Linda, Robert, James, Michael, even the hotel receptionist, they were all supporting me. For the first time in years, I had a support network made up of people who respected me. It was time to show Charlotte that she was no longer dealing with the mother who let herself be trampled on. It was time for the final confrontation. The next day, I decided it was time to end this situation once and for all. I couldn't keep living with the constant threat of Charlotte showing up with lawyers or inventing new ways to pressure me. I called Linda in the morning. "Linda, I want you to organize something for this afternoon." "What do you need, Mrs. Vance?" "I want you to call Charlotte and tell her I'm willing to talk to her, but under my conditions." "What conditions?" "The meeting will be at the house, at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. You, Robert James, as a witness, and I will be present. No lawyers, no shouting, no threats." "Are you sure, Mrs. Vance?" "Completely sure." "And if she doesn't accept the conditions?" "Then there is no meeting. But Linda, I need you to make it very clear to her that this is her last chance to talk to me. If she rejects this meeting, or if she comes with lawyers, or if she disrespects anyone present, there will not be a next time." "Understood, Mrs. Vance." An hour later, Linda called me back. "Mrs. Vance, I spoke with Charlotte, and?" At first, she was very upset. She said, "Why do other people have to be present?" "What did you tell her?" "I told her that those were your conditions. Take them or leave them." "And in the end, what did she decide?" "She's coming, but she said this was ridiculous and that you were being very dramatic." "Linda, are you and Robert comfortable being present?" "Yes, Mrs. Vance. We want to support you." I spent the rest of the day mentally preparing for the confrontation. I put on my new emerald green dress, the one that made me feel strong and confident. At 4:30, I arrived at the house. Linda had prepared coffee and had arranged chairs in the living room so we could all sit comfortably. Robert had cut some flowers from the garden and put them in a vase in the center of the table. James arrived promptly at 5 minutes to 5. "Mrs. Vance, are you ready for this?" "As ready as one can be." At exactly 5 o'clock, Charlotte arrived. I saw her coming from the window. She came alone, dressed in a formal black suit, as if it were a business meeting. Her expression was one of annoyance and determination. Linda opened the door for her. "Hello, Charlotte. Please, come in." Charlotte entered and looked around the living room. It was the first time she had seen the furnished house since the day she took everything. "I see you bought new furniture," she said without greeting me. "Hello, Charlotte. Yes, I bought what was necessary." She sat in the chair that was opposite me. Linda and Robert sat to one side, James to the other. "Why do all these people have to be present?" Charlotte asked, annoyed. "Because they are witnesses to this conversation. And because they are the people who have supported me when you decided to disrespect me." "Mom, this is ridiculous." "Charlotte, I set the rules for this meeting very clearly. If you are not willing to respect them, you can leave right now." She settled into her chair with a look of annoyance. "Fine. What do you want me to do? I want you to explain to me why you believe you had the right to make decisions about my house without consulting me." "Mom, we've already talked about this. I just wanted to help Linda and Robert, and I thought you would want to help them too." "Charlotte, that is not an explanation. That is a justification. I am asking you why you did not consult me before deciding." Because I knew you would put up obstacles." "What kind of obstacles?" "You would have said you didn't have space, or that you didn't know Linda and Robert well, or that you wanted to be alone. And those wouldn't have been valid reasons?" "But Mom, you have a 3-bedroom house. You have plenty of space." "Charlotte, do you understand that the size of my house does not give you the right to decide who lives in it?" "But it's just that you've always been very closed off to meeting new people." James leaned forward. "Excuse me for interrupting, but did you ask your mother if she wanted to meet new people?" Charlotte looked at him, annoyed. "You have no business getting involved in this." "Charlotte," I said firmly, "James is here because I invited him. Are you going to treat him with respect, or does this conversation end?" "Fine, fine." Linda spoke for the first time. "Charlotte, can I ask you something?" "What?" "Why did you tell us that your mother wanted us to come live with her?" Charlotte turned red. Because I knew you wouldn't accept if you thought it was charity." "But it was charity," Robert said. "And there's nothing wrong with that if it's offered with respect." "Charlotte," I continued, "do you understand that lying to Linda and Robert was also wrong?" "I didn't lie to them. I just adapted the truth to make them feel better." "That's called lying, Charlotte." "Oh, Mom, don't be so dramatic." "Charlotte, that is exactly the attitude that bothers me. Every time I point out something you did wrong, you tell me I'm being dramatic or exaggerating." "But you are exaggerating. Do you think it's an exaggeration that I want to have a say in my own house?" "No, but do you think it's an exaggeration that I want to be consulted before you invite people to live with me?" "No, but do you think it's an exaggeration that I want my feelings to be considered?" "No, but it all turned out well. Linda and Robert have a place to live. You have company. Everyone wins." James spoke again. "Excuse me, Charlotte, but do you believe that the end justifies the means?" "What do you mean?" "That if the result is good, it doesn't matter how it was achieved." "In this case, yes." "And what if your mother had decided to sell the house out of frustration from all of this? The result would still be good." "But she didn't sell the house." "But she could have, and it would have been your fault." Charlotte was quiet for a moment. "Look, Mom, maybe I could have handled it differently, but my intentions were good." "Charlotte, do you know how many times you've told me that in the last few days?" "What?" "That maybe you could have handled it differently. That your intentions were good, but you have never said that what you did was wrong. Because I don't think it was that wrong." "Really? Really?" I got up from my chair and walked to the window overlooking the garden. The roses that Robert had planted were blooming beautifully. "Charlotte, do you know what Michael told me when he spoke with me?" "What did he tell you?" "He told me that you have a habit of making decisions for others without consulting them. Is that true?" Michael exaggerates. "Does he? Linda? Robert? Have you noticed that?" Linda and Robert looked at each other uncomfortably. "Answer my mom," Charlotte said, annoyed. "Charlotte," Linda said hesitantly, "you often tell us what medicines we should take, what television shows are good for us, because I care about you. But you never ask us if we want that help," Robert added. "See?" I told her. "I'm not the only one who feels this way." Charlotte was quiet for several minutes. I could see she was processing the information, but also that she was fighting against it. "Charlotte," I finally said, "I need you to understand something very important." "What?" "I love you. You are my daughter, and you will always be my daughter, but I will not allow you to continue treating me as if my opinion doesn't matter." "Mom, I need you to acknowledge that what you did was wrong, not mishandled, wrong, and I need you to apologize sincerely. And if I do that, then we can start to rebuild our relationship, but under new rules." "What rules?" "That you respect me as an adult capable of making her own decisions, that you consult me before making plans that involve me, and that you understand that if you break those agreements, I will set boundaries again." Charlotte stared at the floor for a long time. When she looked up, she had tears in her eyes. "Mom, it's very hard for me to admit that I was wrong." "I know, sweetie, but it's necessary. It's just that I've always thought I knew what was best for everyone. And now I realize that maybe I don't always know what's best for others." It was the first real sign of reflection I had seen in her. "Mom, what I did was wrong. I shouldn't have decided for you. I shouldn't have lied to Linda and Robert. And I shouldn't have reacted so badly when you confronted me. And I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry." For the first time in weeks, her apology sounded sincere. "Thank you, Charlotte. We can try to start over. We can try, but it will take time to rebuild the trust." "I understand. And you understand that Linda and Robert are going to stay here until Michael returns?" "Yes, and that's fine. I like seeing that they're comfortable. And you understand that I am going to continue living at the hotel until I feel ready to come back?" "Why?" "Because I need time for myself. To get to know myself better. To do things I've never done." "Like what?" "Like dance classes." Charlotte smiled for the first time that whole afternoon. "You're taking dance classes?" "Yes, and it's a lot of fun. I'm glad, Mom." "Charlotte, do you know what I want most from you?" "What?" "For you to be happy, but for you to be happy without controlling other people's lives." "I'll try, Mom. That's all I ask." We stood up and hugged. It wasn't the end of our problems, but it was the beginning of a new way of relating to each other. Linda served coffee, and we spent the rest of the afternoon talking like a family that respects each other. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. That night, as I was returning to the hotel, James walked with me to the bus stop. "Mrs. Vance, how do you feel?" "I feel like I got my daughter back, but also like I found myself." "That's the best possible combination. James, thank you for all your support." "Mrs. Vance, you taught me something very important." "What?" "That it's never too late to stand up for yourself, and that the people who truly love us will respect our boundaries." As the bus took me back to the hotel, I looked out the window at the city lights. I no longer felt like a lost and confused woman. I felt like a woman who had learned to value herself. Tomorrow would be another day to continue building the life I really wanted to live. A life where my voice mattered as much as anyone else's. A life where respect was non-negotiable. A life that was finally, truly, my own.